Hello everybody and welcome to another Future of the Fortress. This is the monthly Q&A that Tarn Adams does on the Bay 12 forums. And once a month I make a video where I read the posts. If you would like to see those posts yourself, there's a link down in the description. And if you would like to take part in these Q&As, you can do that by simply going to Bay 12 Games forums, of course via the link in the description, making an account, and then taking part. But before we get started, we're going to jump into the mission status and monthly roundup for Bay 12. And Zach writes, "The fairy tale ending is a reality, but you didn't kiss the toad. You gave him money. The appreciation you give us is part of our being now. It carries us in the cars we drive and sustains us as the food that we eat. There is now no longer any existence except the one that you have provided. When we pass from this world, you will be the reason we are remembered. Congratulations to the generous. Thrito." And then following that, Tarn writes, "So yeah, all the gears have turned and that's what we got. Mostly. A little less than half will go to taxes, and we're continuing to pay people and the new business expenses and such. It's not all personal money, but a lot of it is. Enough that we've solved the main issues of health and retirement that are troubling for independent people, as well as safeguarded the future of the game well enough that we felt comfortable bringing Putnam on to work on with the full code and so forth. Thanks everybody that helped out. It's going to start off on the arena patch soon and then quality of life improvements." And then you can see the slight jump in their revenue for January, which is a very big number jump, from 15,000 to 7.2 million. It's a lot of money. Now, of course, keep in mind this is gross revenue for a business, so taxes are involved as well as all of the other things that have to come out to get paid to people and fees and all that jazz. But aside from them hiring a money management expert and probably an accountant for next year's taxes, I look forward to reading these updates going forward. But now to dive into the Future of the Fortress questions. The first one comes in from Immortal D, and they say, "There are a lot of issues with quality of life considerations that come with premium, as to be expected. How are you prioritizing what to work on and otherwise staying organized? What is your design reason for splitting and recombining the old masonry and smoothing architect skills? I'm still confused about stone cutting versus stone carving." And Tarn's response is, "Just have to pull it all in a list and order the list based on what seems the most urgent or annoying. Same as ever. I'm not sure what more detail I could use to describe it. Of course, the save corruption stuff is the worst, and crashes and things that cause loss of progress. Then it just depends on which systems feel the most broken or where changes could help access more of the game for more people. I really don't like the Mason name being applied to so many things that aren't masonry, and it has bothered me for a long time, so this seemed like a good opportunity to change it. With the save compat break." The next one comes in from Kripurim, and they say, and they word this one a little bit strangely, so bear with me. "How functional prosthetics will be in non-magical world? Just a peg leg and a hook, or Dwarven Science is able to provide some better solutions? If so, how about non-magical power armor? 2. I assume absence of health overview of Fortress as it was before is just a matter of time, or was it removed intentionally?" And Tarn's response is, "We usually go with the 1400s cutoff for non-magical stuff. Everything up to then would be fair. So stuff like electricity or nuclear-powered mech suits or whatever wouldn't really be a vanilla thing." And then in regards to the health menu, the long story short version is it would need a lot of art or it would look terrible, and so it's just not ready or usable yet. The next question comes in from Draconis93, and they say, "Would it be possible to enable an earlier adventure mode release, maybe through a beta branch, or even with the old keyboard-based controls and menus? As a new player, what really got me into the game was the ability to play long-term runs with multiple forts and exploring the world I shaped with adventurers. I usually don't play colony sims at all, but the vast scope of the possible interactions and the proc-gen nature of the game hooked me in this time. The lack of adventure mode, however, is extremely painful for me. It feels like being kept out of the most interesting part of the game. Since the Steam release, I've tried several times to get back into 47, but it feels like a totally different game. mostly because of the graphics. So here I am, hoping in an early beta branch because development of the new controls seems like it could be quite a long-term task. And Tarn's response is, I don't think this is likely. It doesn't work as is, unplayable for a variety of reasons, and getting some partially working thing up will just be lost labor. Once we get SDL2 stuff up on an experimental branch, which shouldn't be too long from now, we'll have that infrastructure though. So I can't rule it out either at some point down the line. The next question comes in from Drakkar, and they say, right now, zooming in and out, or UI scaling in the premium version, results in textures being blurry, and it's especially visible on higher resolutions. Do you plan to add a nearest neighbor scaling in the future? And Tarn quotes Putnam's response, so I'll read hers, and she says, yes, I'm doing that. Different scale modes are part of the plans for the STL2 update I'm doing. Next question comes in from Captain, and they say, so my question is, in what way will we be able to interact with Legends data in the future? Using DFHack in old versions, you could run an export Legends command and get a huge XML file. Is this something that's possible in the Steam release? And Tarn quotes Patrick Lundell's response, so I'll read it. And they say, the native Legend XML export functionality will be restored according to Toady. Presumably, it was something that had to be dropped in order to do the release in time, as it is something that isn't strictly essential. DFHack is a community project outside of Dwarf Fortress itself, so the additional export DFHack does on top of the native export is not something that Toady is responsible for, apart from the fact that he's not opposed to the DFHack project. Obviously, within Toady's power to add additional data to the native XML export, reducing the need for DFHack to export it, would be obviously a low priority side activity. Moving further away from Dwarf Fortress itself, the usage of DF and DFHack XML exports has thus been taken care of by Legends Viewer, as well as various browser-based versions. You might find that niche to be somewhat crowded. Cooperation with current maintainers if they want or need it, or looking for some other tools that might be a better option, in which case the DFHack sphere would be a good place to start. And Tarn responds with, yeah, Patrick's correct. This is just a button that needs to be added, along with a progress bar. I think Putnam already did a pass on this in some multi-threaded way that either did or didn't work, as I recall. It's something we'll patch in soon. Some XML format, as before, I imagine. The next question comes in from Vanzetti, and they say, remains of ancient civilizations are a common fantasy trope. Are there any plans to implement it in Dwarf Fortress? Technically, this would be easy as generating a random civ and having all of its members die mysteriously before year one. Behind only ruins. It would be something conceptually similar to how vaults work currently, but with a different flavor. Of course, the key here is to have the ruins be interesting enough to visit. And Tarn's response is, yeah, making them interesting is the tricky part, which is why I'd prefer to have existing civs during regular generation get obliterated, die, and fall, sometimes instead. Then you'd have their whole normal history to work with, etc., and built in the most reliable and consistent way. This probably requires some of the entity rewrite stuff, since the people of fallen civs won't generally be all dead, but just re-emerged into their new formulations, while the ruins still stand. The next is a double hitter coming in from Silverwing and Shaunai Dweller, and they say, I trust bumping up, or down as it may be, of all of the entity creatures, dwarves, elves, humans, etc., and child tags to 18 is just temporary? Entirely too heavy post-industrial legalization vibes over here, as it is, you see. And then Shonai says, what's the reason behind the age of adulthood of all races raised from 12 to 18 in 50.01? The switch from child to adult is very sudden, regardless of age, and it happens so how would you like to see the transition work for some far-off future version of the game where all possible? And yeah, I know that there are threads where people randomly guess at the reasons, but I'm interested in actual thinking here. And Tarn's response is, we wanted to do an apprentice system eventually, tied to both the guild stuff and the workshop profiles, etc. That will capture more of the distinctions. The 12 to 18 thing was from having a graphical game where people were becoming lovers and when they became adults. The old system was abstractly chosen for design purposes, in the same way that The Sims would have people change age groups after 3 days or whatever. It wasn't about accurate depiction of real life. Plenty of that goes on these days as well, and ancient medieval people also generally married later than is often believed, if I recollect. Abstractly, though, about a decade is nice for its duration for generations, and unfortunately it overlaps with reality too much and needed to be changed. Generally speaking, as with The Sims, etc., I'd be happy to simulate several stages of childhood, especially as it relates to personality growth and changes, and also advancing the new chores system into something more like the apprenticeships and beyond. The next question comes in from Oddball Joe, and they say, is there any intention to bring architecture and skilled labor back? Since it's been removed, from what I can tell, the requirements for buildings that is needed before are just now carpentry, wood, masonry, and stone, and any metalsmith labor besides the furnace operation for metal. For what it's worth, I'm fine with this being cut in the interest of streamlining things. And Tarn's response is, it was a weird skill that only applied to a few weird circumstances, so I'm happy enough to see it go. If it comes back, it'll have to be more in a more worthy context, but it's a little hard in a game where everything is so modular. But it could be done with somebody overseeing an actual declared construction zone or something for a pre-declared structure or whatever. Ways to make it work again. The next question comes in from Sue, and they say, how much autonomy does Putnam have when deciding what to work on? And has there been any discussion with her yet on plans for the big wait? And Tarn's response is, it's been pretty complete autonomy so far, since she's been working on the ports and serious bugs. Once that stuff is done, we'll need to be more organized, and it's been easy to put it off so far though, since there's so many things sitting there to be worked on. The next question comes in from Virgil, and they say, I noted while looking into Legends mode that certain hyperlinks seem oddly left out. Masterwork engravings, for example, are given names in every other tab, but only allowed to be opened in the Art tab. Meanwhile, war logs describing details of battles, including how many combatants and of what type, as well as the aesthetic who outwitted who descriptions, don't even get a tab of their own and have to be manually scrolled through in the Chronicles by Age tab to find their appropriate links. I feel like this is just an honest mistake because there doesn't make sense why Hyperlink's system would leave out the ease and convenience of having all the named historical subject matters to be hyperlinked into its appropriate tab. I would love to see if anyone else is having this problem or if it's just me. Just to clarify again, my problem is that Masterwork engravings and warfare logs are named throughout every other tab but aren't given hyperlinks except through very specific tabs, whereas other historical subject matter always has a hyperlink no matter what tab you're in. If it's named, it has a hyperlink, access to all tabs except for those two, apparently. And Tarn's response is, not so much a mistake as that we didn't have the time to finish them all. Generally, when it comes to available hyperlinks, it really is just a time question, and we want to get them all up and working. The next one comes in from Cripurium, and they say, a question to Putnam. What was your first impression of the Dwarf Fortress source code as a developer? Was it good? Was it okay? Was it bad? And Putnam's response is, well, it's pretty well optimized, and the biggest low-hanging fruit I found was an oversight rather than some fundamental optimization issue. The rest is, as you would expect from a decades-long solo project, which is to say, consistent enough that I can actually get used to it, which is, to be frank, the best one can ask for. The next one comes in from Magistrate 101, and they say, Could a toggle get added to the stock screen that hides all of the placed and constructed items? It's impossible to know how much of a metal you have left if you've used some for walls and floors, as they're counted together. You can only tell if it's been used by, or whether the melt button appears for a specific item. 2. Could the stockpile screen be made a bit more granular? Example, moving clothing to their own category, replacing the usable and unusable toggles with a submenu for equipment and clothes size. Creating and writing a category that holds sheets and quires and scrolls and book bindings and scroll rollers, replacing the sheets category. It would also be amazing if we could create and edit our own categories like we can for work details, but I understand if that's an ordeal to accomplish. And Tarn's response is, It all seems reasonable to me. We're working on quality of life stuff for the next while after the arena, so people should make their suggestions in the forum. The next one comes in from Urist McSaddist, and they say, do you have a rough idea on how fort economics are going to work after the economy update? And Tarn's response is, nope, that's a long ways off. Gods will be able to curse goods or explode them or something by then, but we have a long list of things we'd like to do, like negotiating more specific long-term trade deals, fairs, and making rarity of goods matter, which completely screws up the current embark system, and sending out trade caravans, and making all of the production stuff from World Gen happen during play and throughout the world, which impacts everything, etc. The next one comes in again from Cripperum, and they say, what is the vision of God's nature in Myths and Magic arc? They're always primordial and unchanged, or sometimes the gods can be created or altered by a compound belief of a large enough amount of people. My question was mostly about people being able to create a new god by believing, or changing a god's aspects like sphere by believing. For example, a new religion with a slightly different view of a god emerges and becomes the dominant one in the world. Will the corresponding god change to fit that religion? And Tarn's response is, it's a common enough thing in speculative fiction that I suppose it should be supported, but the gods through believing thing has always seemed a bit sort of anachronistic to me, if that's vaguely the right word for such a thing. Obviously, real-world religions have changed and emerged, as Patrick has went over, for example, but the idea of the god itself mutating rather than interpretations changing feels more modern, though I have no idea, really. The next one comes in from Grimmy, and they say, I've not heard of any way for a dwarf to completely forget who they are, causing natural or re-rolled personality. Have you ever considered adding something like this, with spells, gods, curses, or extreme physical or psychological trauma? Are there any particular problems that could prevent something from like this being added? And Tarn's response is, it hasn't come up. I don't think it would be hard to add, but it would need to come up. We've only done gradual and partial personality changes from memories. And now I'm just going to take a word to point out that everybody, if you would like to support these episodes and this show directly, you can do that via my merch store, where I now have mugs for sale. You could go buy yourself a vile mug of darkness or a little t-shirt and support the cause of me covering Dwarf Fortress as an independent entity and trying to stay as far away from things like those horrible shaving sponsors that you see on so many other videos. So check out my merch, check out the Twitch streams, check out the other things I do on this channel, and maybe stick around, because I think I'm a pretty cool person sometimes. On with the video. The next one comes in from Kyo1995, and they say, dwarf behavior is very complex and interesting, but there's one point where it falls flat, the most, in my opinion. The way civilians handle threats, such as invasions and megabeasts, it feels very robot-like. How feasible would it be to develop a more organic threat response, i.e. the first dwarf to see the threat screams very loudly or something like that, and then the citizens in a large area either run to their rooms and lock the doors if they're cowardly, while braver ones grab the nearest improvised weapons and form a group and go investigate out the source of the scream, and walking around armed and doing voluntary civilian drills after the fortress has been attacked a few times recently would make their behavior feel much more organic. Can we expect anything like that before or during the Army and Siege update? And Tarn's response is, for the Siege update, we're going to focus on basic stuff first. Like the sieges not being a threat at all if you use some minor exploits, or even just accidentally not being a threat. Something like that you describe would essentially require all sieges to start in an ambush mode, which feels like it might be a bit off in terms of being dramatic. Even with the ambush sieges, if we have dwarves only know about things they've seen individually, then you wouldn't really be able to order squads at all. It seems like it wouldn't work, unless the game has no player whatsoever, which is fine for a 100% sim, but not what the game has been up to this point. The next one comes in from Onura46, and they say, "Thank you for introducing so much joy into the world with your games. Hope you're happy and healthy. I usually lurk, but I had to join and ask, are cavern invader numbers pulled from the local site populations like wild animals, whole world populations, or created ex nihilo?" I don't know what that means. There are numbers that appear in detailed legends exports, which I assume some of the number of lizard men, for instance, in the entire world. But are there regional subdivisions beyond that, like one group that lives in the mountains and one group that lives in the hills, an amount just for the site, maybe? And then 2, I guess the real question between the lines is, if I had to choose genocidally to exterminate and pacify all of the angry natives, could I cause them to go extinct and or basically stop invasions? Besides that, any chance for brokering peace with the cavern invaders in the future? Maybe we could offer them tribute. I could sympathize if they didn't want that, though. And Tarn's response is, it appears to not care about pops here, aside from using the local layer-linked civ creature type properly. I think it does have the population information somewhere, but it isn't using it. And he says, it is pretty extreme right now, especially since I don't think indoor irritation dies down in the same way as outdoor irritation does. Which makes me go, wait, outdoor irritation dies down? Really? That's news. Next question comes in from Kripurim again, and they say, did something change with how minecarts work? It looks like some of the old tricks don't work anymore. For example, minecarts are no longer generate mist when slide over the water on high speeds, which I think they still do. It's just not shown because I don't think there's a sprite for it currently. And Tarn's response is, I don't recall changing them at all, or that even being in the code area. We should probably add the ability to do vehicles and tracks to the arena. A quote from NPK, and they say, I've noticed that wars are more common and long-lasting once begins playing in the world, as opposed to during World Gen. I assume that probably is most activities occur differently or at different rates in World Gen versus the world once after the world has been active. I was wondering how these world events are handled mechanically in 2 different modes. Like, is the code for various types of events similar in both phases, or did each event have to be extensively rewritten for world activation? And any notable examples? Also, do you have a sort of philosophy when it comes to modeling these historical type events, in terms of how important and evolved actors and personalities or ethics should be? Or if things like going to war ought to be based on more practical considerations like likelihood of success and some sort of goal or need to achieve? Or should things be randomized and up to interpretation by the player? And Tarn's response is, they work pretty differently from each other as I recollect. I'm not sure there's been any peacemaking aside from anything that happens in your fortress. Everything is mechanically different since there is very little teleportation since the world activation many, many years ago. And it just flows out from there. When it is doing these things, it uses all of those things like a giant mush. It ran randomly in various formulas. Army size comparisons matter, but the level of hostility and leader personalities also matter. Since most wars won't involve the player, it's best if it makes some kind of sense rather than being tuned for a given playthrough. Although, it will still do that currently with triggers, etc. The next question comes in from MYK, and they say, outside of Strange Mood, dwarves cannot make blunt weapons out of the wonderfully dense platinum. Is this a game design decision? And Tarn's response is, I think the decision captured what happened here, more or less. I don't think a problem with the player dwarves making whatever they want out of whatever, or even if it's ridiculous, as long as the item's ridiculousness shines through properly, as it deforms and such. But it shouldn't impact the AI decision-making if it's ridiculous. And I personally just took an easy road way back then with whatever variables I had at the time. The next question comes in from Kiloku, and they say, in older versions, it was possible to succeed from your civ by rejecting an offer to become a barony. This apparently has been changed to only delay the question until the next year without changing political relations. Will it be possible to secede and come back? And Tarn's response is, I don't recall changing it. I also don't recall this older thing. That's just me talking. But I wouldn't be surprised if it works differently since we had to revamp all the diplomacy code to make new alerts work. We're not really tackling the threat, the meat of this option until we get to embark scenario stuff most likely, though the army and siege stuff is a wild card and vaguely in this direction. The next question comes in from Lexiville, and they say, regarding stairs, I realized that we can no longer build up stair directly on the same tile as a carved up stair to block the entry from lower elevations. Was this an intentional change? Are there also plans to re-implement the ability to build one elevation stairs instead of spanning two at minimum elevations for situations like these where we only want one stair? And Tarn's response is, it was an intentional change in the sense that we wanted stairs to not be 3 different tiles that new people have to understand and keep track of. It was not an intentional change in the sense that we were aware of the issue with not allowing upstairs and just didn't have time to get to it. We are planning to add some sort of system to address it. I'm not sure what that will look like since I don't want 3 separate tiles to be front and center. It would be best for existing construction and designation command to just play nice with each other and allow you to build where you want, while also still requiring multi-level placement or something, and just linking it to existing stuff and combining designations and constructions, etc. And with that, we've reached the end of the Future of the Fortress. Once again, if you want to support these videos directly you can find the links down in the description of this video. And if you would like to take part in these discussions, link to the post is also down below. I just want to say thank you once again to everybody who watched last month and then everybody who's watching this month as well. It's been lovely seeing so many new faces come into the Dwarf Fortress community over the past couple of weeks. And I look forward to getting to know all of you better as you stumble into my weird content from time to time. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.